President Trump, did President Biden leave you a letter?
He may have. Wait. Don't they leave it in the desk? I don't know. Oh.
What's in there?
Thank you, Peter. It could have been years before we found it. Wow. Thank you.
What does it say on the outside?
Maybe we should all read it together.
Let's read it.
Well, maybe I'll read it first and then make that determination.
That sounds great.
Peter, thank you very much. I may not have seen this for months.
Happy to help with the passing of the torch.
I did. I left him one in the desk just like this.
What are you talking about with them all?
Unification of our country.
What did your TikTok order do, Mr. President?
Just gave me the right to sell it or close it. Essentially with TikTok, I have the right to either sell it or close it. And we'll make that determination. And we may have to get an approval from China, too. I'm not sure. But I'm sure they'll approve it. And if they don't approve it, it would be somewhat of a hostile act, I think. But it's good for China if it gets approved.
Mr. President, so you're not guaranteeing that TikTok will be around after 90 days from today?
No, but it could very well be. It makes sense for it to be, because it's got tremendous value. But if we create the value by approving, in other words, that approval gives it tremendous value. If that's the case, then we should be entitled to 50% as a country. You understand? You haven't heard that one before, right? That's called a joint venture.
The big headline is that Marco Rubio has been confirmed as Secretary of State, and not only confirmed, but confirmed unanimously and in a bipartisan vote. 99-0 was the final tally. He was also confirmed unanimously out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee prior to that full floor vote. In fact, Rubio gaggled with reporters not too long ago and said that it is a great honor. He said that he feels hopefully people voted for him because they think that he would do a good job. He also opined a little bit about, leaving the Senate, obviously, as he makes this transition to be the top diplomat, saying that he will miss the relationships here. He was asked about some of the current global crises that are occurring, including this new ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. He said that it presents a pretty unique situation and talked a little bit about hoping that both sides continue to comply by the agreement so that it can be carried out in full. He also was asked about the timetable for ending the war in Ukraine. Of course, President Trump has made that a priority and has said at times that he would end it, on day one. But obviously, that war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Rubio saying that he is not going to put any kind of timetable on when the conflict may end, but reiterating that it certainly remains a top goal of the new president.
As promised, President Trump went straight to work, signing numerous executive orders within hours of taking office. They include requiring federal workers to return to work full-time in person immediately, a freeze on all federal hiring until full control of the government is achieved, a directive to every department and agency in the federal government to address the cost of living crisis, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Treaty, and ending the weaponization of government against the political adversaries of the previous administration. Now, many of the orders he intends to sign also include actions on immigration, fossil fuel development, and ending diversity and inclusion programs across the federal government.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. Today, I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
The Tory freeze, as you announced in your speech, preventing bureaucrats from issuing any more regulations until we have full control of this, the government and this administration. Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I have a pen?
The next item, sir, is a freeze on all federal hiring, excepting the military and a number of other excluded categories. again, until full control of the government is achieved and we understand the objectives of government going forward.
Could you imagine Biden doing this? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Sir, the next item, as you announced in your speech, is a requirement that federal workers return to full-time in-person work immediately. Thank you, sir. Next, we have a directive to every department and agency in the federal government to address the cost of living crisis that has cost Americans so dearly. Thank you, sir. The next item here is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty. Yes, sir. We're going to save over $1 trillion by withdrawing from that treaty. And the next item, sir, is a letter that will be transmitted to the United Nations explaining that we are withdrawing from the Paris Climate Treaty. Thank you, sir. This next item is a directive to the federal government ordering the restoration of freedom of speech and preventing government censorship of free speech going forward. And lastly, sir, before we go back to the Oval Office to sign a large number of other items, is a directive to the federal government ending the weaponization of government against the political adversaries of the previous administration, as we've seen. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Pretty fun job.
And President Trump throwing some of his famous Sharpie pens into the crowd as he has just signed a number of these executive orders.
President, do you have any reaction to the pardons President Biden did at the last minute?
Well, I'm not going to discuss it now. I think it was unfortunate that he did that. We won't discuss it now. There's plenty of time to discuss it.
Thank you very much, guys.
Should we go to lunch?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
President Trump has vowed and has begun the process of overhauling federal immigration and border policy, this through a number of executive actions announced today. Camilo Montoyo-Galvez and Tom Dupree join me now to discuss. Camilo is CBS News' immigration and politics reporter. Tom Dupree formerly served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Camilo, I know this is a hard thing to ask. Can you summarize briefly what we expect to see from the Trump administration on day one as it regards immigration policy?
Major, the scope and the nature of the executive actions on immigration that President Trump is expected to issue today are frankly breathtaking. Let's go through the list. At the U.S.-Mexico border, President Trump is expected to issue a national emergency that would allow him, Major, to divert more resources and manpower from the Department of Defense, including active duty military, to stop people from crossing the border illegally and to help Customs and Border Protection set up facilities, for example, and also the construction of the border wall, which is being reinstated as well as we speak today. We also know that the president is expected to try to start the process of reinstating the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, that Trump administration program that required migrants to await their asylum hearings on the Mexican side of the border. That, of course, as you know, Major, requires the consent of the Mexican government, which has yet to publicly agree to that policy. We also know that the president is expected to issue a sweeping ban on asylum claims at the border. It is unclear how that will work because existing Biden administration regulations currently ban most asylum seekers from being able to request asylum, but the administration has already shut down CBP-1. That is that application that was one of the exemptions from that Biden administration policy. It allowed people in Mexico to request a time to enter the country legally. Those applications have now been voided and canceled, and tens of thousands of migrants, according to internal government estimates, are now stranded in Mexico, unable to access those deployments that the Biden administration offered. And then lastly, Major, on legal immigration, the president has vowed to suspend refugee admissions for 4 months. These are not migrants who are entering the country illegally. Rather, they are people fleeing war and persecution abroad who have been vetted and screened for medical concerns and for security concerns for years, who now will not be able to enter the country legally. And so this is really a sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration, but also really immigration in general, Major.
Camilo, thank you very much. Tom, I want to ask you this. Does the declaration of an emergency give President Trump any additional powers to execute these orders? Question one. Question two, is there anything about what you heard from Camilo or that you've read about these executive actions involving deployment of the U.S. military that raise any legal questions in your mind?
Sure. Well, in the first question, Major, yes, the declaration of emergency does give the president broader powers. In some respects, it's similar to his designation of certain gangs as terrorist organizations. These are both executive declarations that, under statute, give the president greater authority to take certain immigration-related steps. As far as the concerns about using the military, there is a law, it's dusted off occasionally from time to time, called the Posse Comitatus Act, which basically prohibits using the United States military for domestic law enforcement operations. It's not entirely clear how President Trump anticipates using the U.S. military. He's talked about using it to secure the border. If it is being used in kind of a foreign policy sense, in other words, to protect our border from an enemy invasion, that strikes me as something that would be more defensible as opposed to using it for purely domestic law enforcement purposes. But it can be a fine line, it can be a gray line, and I have no doubt that today's executive orders are going to be keeping a lot of lawyers busy for a lot of months.
Tom, is there any time limit on emergency declarations of this kind? Meaning, do these expanded powers that you just described that are conferred to a president if there's an emergency declaration have any time limit?
Well, generally speaking, no. Typically, when a president declares an emergency, it will extend until either the emergency is declared over or until someone can persuade a court to basically say the emergency is ended and your powers revert to their normal form. But the other thing the presidents can do is they can simply re-up. In other words, if they were bumping up against a legal time limit, you could see the president basically saying, I'm reassessing the circumstances, I'm reassessing the facts on the ground, and I'm declaring that the emergency is hereby extended, thereby allowing me to deploy my greater powers.
Camilo Montoya Galvez and Tom Dupree, thank you very much for your expertise.
And that we're just witnessing as the former Vice President Kamala Harris's motorcade just left, and we are already getting a sense of how things are changing here in Washington and around the world. Margaret Brennan, I know you have some new reporting.
Sure, and a historic departure for the first female Vice President of the United States, Nora.
Now we see a helicopter known as Marine One, and the president is in it. It's now Special Air Mission 47 departing. Special Mission 46 departing the east front of the Capitol as Joe Biden leaves Washington for the final time, ending a half-century career as a public servant.